George Galloway's take on Jeremy Corbyn, Labour and Brexit this week follows in an hour on BBC One. But now tonight's panel will get us talking.
Tonight we're at the JCB factory near Uttoxeter, and welcome to Question Time. And with me on the panel tonight, the new chairman of the Conservative Party, once Immigration Minister, Brandon Lewis. The former Labour MP and Deputy Prime Minister under Tony Blair, now in the House of Lords, John Prescott. The political editor and columnist for the Sunday Express, Camilla Tominey. The writer and activist from Novara Media, who says she wants luxury communism now, Ash Sarkar. And born in Germany but brought up in Leeds, the UK chief executive of the global manufacturing firm Siemens, Jürgen Mayer. Right, thank you very much. Now, remember at home, as always, if you want to get in on this debate, you have your own say, our hashtag BBCQT, and via Twitter and Facebook you can do that. And I should just say we're here at JCB, and some of our audience, many of them actually, work on this site, this vast place, so we may get relevant comments about that. Let's take our first question tonight. And this one comes from Kevin Abbott, please. Kevin Abbott.
When are the right-wing media and Tories going to realise lies and smears against Corbyn no longer work?
Ash Sarkar.
I mean, it's quite sad, really. They know that they've lost the argument when it comes to economic policy and social policy, so the Conservatives are reduced to cantering after half-baked hit pieces, which once upon a time would have gone largely unremarked on. I don't think that they're going to get it that politics has changed in this country, because that means listening to people and actually meeting some of their real concerns. But one of the things that really worries me, as someone who works in the media, is that this botched smear operation about is Jeremy Corbyn a Czech spy, does he rappel down buildings and trade state secrets or what have you, is that this was based on a single source who lacked credibility and was basically a fantasist. This really should not have made it past any quality newsroom. So I think one of the things that we need to make sure we're doing is, rather than frame this as how do we protect Corbyn from smears, is look at how do we make sure that our press is held to the very highest standards so it can effectively carry out its function of speaking truth to power and holding politicians to account.
Okay. Brandon Lewis, you're chairman of the Conservative Party. It was your current Defence Secretary, Gavin Williamson, who said that Corbyn met foreign spies. That was a betrayal of this country. He cannot be trusted. Do you agree with what Williamson said?
Well, I think Gavin and others actually have raised the legitimate point about, if you look actually over a long period of time, and I'm talking decades, about people that the leader of the Labour Party has met and spent time with and been involved with, I think it does actually raise legitimate questions. I'm slightly surprised, actually, if we look at Corbyn himself, why he hasn't just dealt with this and been transparent about what's happened and what he's done. I find that very odd. But coming to the point of the gentleman's sort of key question about the press, I actually, this is where the end part of what Ash was saying, I agree with. I think one of the absolute bedrocks of our society, of a free and open democracy, is having a free press. And what we do have in our press is, right across the press, is people who have opinions from different areas, different newspapers, different media outlets, and challenging us in the way you have done with your question, and others will later on today, as politicians, to be able to deal with that and answer that. And I think having a free press, and one of the things I found quite shocking was this kind of inference we saw yesterday from Labour, that if you ask difficult questions, I think the phrase was "change is coming," which kind of infers that you'll be shut down. We need a free press. We need the press to be able to ask those questions and challenge politicians and people in public life.
And do you stand by your fellow minister's remark that Corbyn cannot be trusted and he has betrayed this country?
Well, I actually go wider than that. I actually think if you look at, as I've said, what Corbyn has stood for, things he has said, things he has voted for, things he has voted against, over the years. I don't trust him to lead our country, and I don't trust the Labour Party with our economy or our country more generally.
I'll come to you in a moment. John Prescott.
Terrible statement he just made. Look, I've been 50 years in Parliament, and I have to say this is the dirtiest slur I've seen against any individual politician. I have known Jeremy all the time he's been in Parliament, and I have to say he's an honest man who states principles, might not be agreeable to you, but has become the elected leader of the Labour Party. For them now to start saying things like he is a betrayer, that in fact he now has acted as a double agent and killed Philby. What annoys me most is that basically you, Brandon, was the one that came in office a couple of weeks ago, and I have the statement here, so it's not fake news, it's your statement, which says a new respect pledge for Tory candidates. And what it says here, Conservative candidates will be suspended if they insult rivals, the new party chairman says. Fine, that was a state. I was hopeful that might be so. But now you've got top people in the Tory party lined up with the lined up with the papers themselves, the right-wing papers, to say that he's a traitor, a double agent. This is unacceptable. Now, I want to say that your vice chairman, who you appointed, made these statements about him was selling British secrets to communist spies. My God, there's no evidence for that. Nobody's produced any evidence. Will you now, under this new programme of a better moral standard, will you now sack your vice chairman who said those things without evidence? If you want to know, have a look.
I want to reply to that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. John's right. I made it very clear a few weeks ago that we should have a respect pledge. I'm absolutely shocked that the Labour Party is refusing to engage and set its own respect pledge.
Because it's
and
had
there's
that
a very
policy for
big,
years,
there's a
Brandon.
very.
It's had that policy for
If I
years.
just finish. There's a very big difference between having a proper, robust debate about what people stand for, what they have said, what they have done, and have been transparent about that, and personal abuse and calling for physical abuse of candidates, MPs, or people in the general public, which we are seeing from the hard left and even from the shadow chancellor of the Labour Party endorsing and repeating comments like that is not fit in British
But what
politics.
about your
And
new
Labour
code?
need to
You're
call
the
that
one that
out
said
and
it.
deal with it, John. And until they do, I'm afraid it's shocking that we've got a Labour Party that won't stand up
This isn't
and
about
call this out and
spies,
deal with
it's
it.
about lies, and you should answer that.
All right, you, sir, in the middle. Let's... Number of people with their hands up, and then I'll come to you. Yes, you in the middle there.
You're going on about free press and factual information and everything and the facts. Why are the government trying to, with the Child Maintenance Service and the Child Support Agency, trying to block everything out that's going on in that country, in the country now? It's affecting thousands of people across the country. There's free press, there's evidence, and they're leaving people in poverty, homeless, there's suicides, there's no account for that, and most of all, it's affecting the children, which is never in the press.
All right, well, let's stick with the Corbyn point, though, which was the original question. Up there, over there, you. Yes.
I think Jeremy Corbyn has built mistrust himself by lying to students in the belief that they will get free tuition in the last election and reneging on his manifesto promises.
OK. Camilla Tomlin.
I'm not sure Labour have got a leg to stand on respect when you have the Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell calling for Esther McVey to be lynched. That's not gentler, kinder politics. As for the worst smear ever, I would imagine that some of Tom Watson's smears that were exacerbated by believing in a fantasist called Nick, which suggested that a number of Tory MPs were paedophiles, is probably a little more serious than what's been levelled against Jeremy Corbyn, a man who has a history of being friends with our enemies. If it had been a Tory MP who, files had been discovered, had been fraternising with a Czech spy, Czech diplomat, the Labour Party would have been all over it like a rash. It's absolutely hypocritical to suggest that you would have engaged in some sort of investigation. The press is perfectly entitled to investigate claims which appear to be in the public interest, as are Jeremy Corbyn's meetings with Irish paramilitaries, Jeremy Corbyn's meetings with Hamas, Jeremy Corbyn's meetings with Hezbollah. The list goes on. You know, at any given time, this man has got a pattern of behaviour of meeting with people that others wouldn't even contemplate sitting down at the table.
Okay. I'll come to you. Can I...
It's a one-way conversation, John.
Blimey, the Express.
All right, hang on
Sunday
a second.
Express. Blimey, old
They're
Labour.
no different.
Hey, blimey, momentum.
Let me just go to Jürgen Mayer before I do.
Momentum, you know you support them now,
Look,
John.
Just one correction to what you said. John McDonnell didn't actually ask for anybody to be lynched. He reported what had been said, which is slightly different.
Hang on a minute. He
No,
did
this is a
say,
legal point. I've made it.
You made
now,
the legal point. He has appeared in speeches where he has suggested that, quote,
Suggested,
direct...
not said.
No, he said direct action should be taken against Tories, wherever they are. Wherever
That's a
they are,
democratic right to
direct
protest,
action. No,
actually.
that's actually inciting violence and hatred,
democracy,
Ash.
Camilla, I hate to break
No,
it to
I'm
you.
sorry. In a democratic society, what we do is we have meaningful debates. We
And
don't
we
go
have the
around
right to
making
protest.
out that anyone with Tory ideas is
All right,
scum.
let's have a
and that's
all
what
right.
Momentum does.
Let's...
And you should be
no,
ashamed to
hang on a
support it.
second. But let's try and have a meaningful debate, which doesn't mean people telling each other they should be ashamed of each other at this stage of the programme. Jürgen.
Well, what I definitely agree with is that we absolutely need to protect the free press and the freedom of speech.
Hear, hear.
And I do believe there is danger in just dismissing everything as fake news. However, having said that, I think there is also a point where we do need responsible news. And my view on this particular issue, and I know there has been some other issues that weren't in the question about meetings with some other, let's say, unsavoury characters of Hezbollah or whatever, but this particular issue, there doesn't seem to be a lot of legs in it. And what I would say, it probably is best we just sort of calm down. And what I would rather do is to judge a Jeremy Corbyn and a Prime Minister in terms of what the policies are now and what we're going to need to do going forward, rather than looking back 30 years.
There was a comment from Jeremy Corbyn about this, where he said that the coverage shows how worried the media bosses are. They're right to be. We've got news for the billionaire tax exile press barons. Change is coming. Does that worry you, if you're in favour of free press? Or do you think it would be a good idea if we didn't have our press owned by foreign billionaires or billionaires residing outside the UK?
Well, look, having billions and that being overseas doesn't worry me personally at all. I have a very good conscience.
Well, you've got your billions here, you mean?
But look, at the end of the day, it's less about the ownership of the press. What is important is that we have a responsible and a balanced and a press which is giving us free speech and giving us the information that we need to make the right sorts of judgments, and we need less of fake news.
OK, I'll come to you, Ash, in a second, but the man in spectacles there.
I didn't really know anything about the story, but I came across it on Facebook, and it made me look into it, and I saw the Jeremy Corbyn Facebook address. One of his basics within that was that the free press is an absolutely essential part of democracy and is to be protected. And even within your quote there, and Brandon Lewis is inferring it as well, is that Jeremy Corbyn is attacking free press. He is doing nothing of the sort. He is saying that a change is going to come because the people want something different. He's not saying an attack on free press.
OK, and the woman up there. The woman up there at the very back.
The free press should be applauded and revered, but they shouldn't tell lies. And it does absolutely no good whatsoever when fake news, to quote the American president, is trumpeted all over the press, and certain people believe in it, a little like the fallacy that Labour is no good with money. Gordon Brown's schedule to get us out of the recession was covered by a lot of the other emerging countries. They got out of the recession many years before we did. If we had carried on with Gordon Brown's policy, we would have been out of the recession years ago. And we wouldn't be...
Okay, fine.
We wouldn't be in the situation where
We're talking about the press. We're not going back. Otherwise, we'll have John Prescott arguing about what Gordon Brown did. We don't want to do that. We're on about the press here. I want to take a point about the press. You, sir, and then I'll come to you, Ash, and then we'll move on. Yes.
I actually think Camilla's hit the nail on the head there.
Thank you.
With Jeremy Corbyn, whether this story is true or not, that there is a bigger point here, and that's Corbyn is a potential Prime Minister. So I as a voter want to know more about our potential Prime Minister and what his views have been over the years, what his views are now, who he has met. I know his supporters don't think it's important, but for me as a voter, because he could be the Prime Minister next time, I think it's very important and very relevant.
Ash. Ash, do you agree with what he's just said, that everything should be above board and shown in public and discussed?
I agree entirely that transparency over policy is of prime importance in politics, and that's what we've been saying for ages, is let's talk policy and move away from these personal smears. I was quite alarmed, actually, that you inferred that Jeremy Corbyn meant the free press should be shut down when he said change is coming. He's not saying that. He's saying let's take a careful look at the collusion of vested interests between press barons and the Tory party and try and unpick those interests. And what's more, if you want to talk about shutting down a free press, I would encourage you to look at your own party's history. In particular, when David Cameron sent his cabinet secretary to The Guardian and said a lot of people would like to see you shut down because of their coverage of the Snowden files. And I also wonder where your outrage was when GCHQ made The Guardian destroy laptops and hard drives as part of their coverage of the Snowden files. That's investigative journalism. That's speaking truth to power, and you guys were silent on it.
Okay. Do bear in mind, when the gentleman there said, talking about what Camilla had said before, when you have a free debate, you talk to a lot of people. Jeremy chooses who he speaks to. But you know, Whitelaw, the Tory Deputy Prime Minister, was talking to the IRA, as was John Major, privately and secretly, because they wanted to get an agreement. Well, I think the agreement we've got with Ireland now is quite critical and came out of those kind of discussions. But the whole attention becomes Labour, not Whitelaw or Major.
All right. Thank you. OK. I'm sorry. We've got to move on because we're 10, 15 minutes in. Before we do Blackpool, we're going to be at Blackpool next week, and we're going to be at Westminster the week after that. On the screen are the details of how to apply. And I'll give them again, as always, at the end. And I'll take a question now from Dan Lear, please. Dan Lear.
Speaking from personal experience, graduates are finding it harder to get graduate-level jobs once they do graduate. Is charging £9,000 a year justified?
John Prescott.
Well, this whole business of... We've had a statement this week about 18+, was about the education money and how it's used. But in reality, the actual debts that have totalled up for those graduates and to get them is impossible. More than that, many of them are not paying it and won't pay it. So you really got to ask yourselves, was it worthwhile? And Labour brought in the first charges, had a disagreement, because I belong to the graduate tax was a better way of doing it. But it went from 3,000 to nearly 9,000. And now you've got massive debts which they can't afford, many being put off to go to the universities. And really, you've got to get a more realistic assessment about the distribution on education. I was 25 before I went to education at Ruskin, a mature grant. I could not have done it with 2 children without a mature student's grant, which meant you were over 25. They've been rubbished altogether. There's 100,000 less in part-time work in university. Greater priorities should be given to that, because they're the very skills of those who fail like me when they had the test at 11+, can come back later into education and are afraid the cuts have knocked hundreds of thousands of them out of the possibility. So it's more than just the grant for the students.
Jürgen Mayer.
Well,
Well, we recruit a lot of graduates and indeed apprentices here in the UK, and our experience is that the graduates we recruit are pretty excellent. I think we have brilliant British universities, high-class universities, but at the end of the day, that does all need paying for. And this is a discussion which is happening not just here in the UK, it's happening everywhere. And I personally think we have come up with quite a good system, which is that there is a payment of tuition fees. However, it is not paid back until graduates are in a position to be earning higher salaries. And it actually seems quite fair to me that those who are earning higher salaries end up paying a little bit back for the education that they have had. I do think there are some small things we can tweak. I think interest rates seem to be a bit high on the student loans. I do think there's an opportunity to bring back maintenance grants to help the people who are less well off and to help them on the ladder of going to university. But all in all, I think it's a pretty fair system.
And when the Prime Minister says, she did this week, that it's the most expensive system of university tuition in the world, or one of them, you think that's a price worth paying for what we get?
Well, I think it is, on the basis that the graduates only pay back the money once you're earning above a threshold. If I may just add one other point, and that is, I do think we might be having the wrong debate. I don't think the issue in the UK is our higher education system. I think it is great. I think where we need to put much more focus and support is on apprenticeships, is on vocational training. And we have, the key issue is what we have is we do have a level of educational snobbery, and what we have to do is we have to say, look, graduate education, brilliant, it's going to cost you some money. Apprenticeship, also brilliant, and it's absolutely on a par, and both of them we need to lift the standards up.
Dan. What's your take on that, Dan?
So I'd say, even though you don't pay back the money until you are earning a high amount, you do have that hanging over you. So even if you don't get to pay the full amount back because you don't earn enough, that debt is still there over your head at all times.
Even though you only pay, after 25,000 earnings, at £9 in 100, isn't it, I think? Something like that. What do you think up there? Let's hear from some more people, and I'll hear from the woman there. Yes, you first.
So I graduated in 2013. I was fortunate enough to pay the £3.5 grand a year. I don't think it was worth that. I certainly don't think it's worth the £9,000 a year.
£3.5 grand wasn't worth it. What happened to you?
Well, I became successful, but I thought the quality of teaching, I thought the university itself, it just wasn't worth that money.
Sorry to be rude, but what did you go on to do after you'd been to university?
Account manager at npower currently. I feel as though I've progressed quite well with my degree. But in terms of the subject itself, I think there has to be a bit more of a balance. Going through sixth form, I was very much streamlined into university, so I completely agree with what Jürgen was saying. There was no real option other than university being encouraged there, so I think...
And the woman there, yes. Yes.
It's approximately 15% of people will pay back their entire student loan. So aren't we just creating a problem for the future? Plus, the starting wage for a lot of graduate jobs is actually less than the £25,000 when people start paying. So a nurse, a teacher, they all earn less than that on their starting wage. So to become a graduate doesn't automatically mean that you're going to get a better paid job. And even if you do, only a very small percentage of those people will actually end up paying the money.
What, so you mean it's painful for the taxpayer in the end, but not for the person?
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Well, I think that if you axe tuition fees altogether, there's an argument that you're then going to put the cost burden onto non-graduates, and they might earn less over the course of their career anyway. I do think that we are a bit too obsessed with university, and in certain sectors of society it's as if all roads only lead to PPE at Oxford, and I know a great many more people who are successful in life who haven't gone to Oxbridge or a similar university. And equally, I think perhaps careers advice could be better in schools so that children aren't always channeled into university first. Why don't more employers think a bit more creatively, and instead of having this minimum you must have a degree, broaden their horizons? There are non-degree on non-academic kids out there that have a great deal to offer. Grant Thornton, I think, did an experiment where they cut the minimum for having graduates. And lo and behold, of the non-graduates that came through, a great many of them really thrived in their top performance band. So actually, I think we need to move away from a university obsession.
Okay. Ash.
I mean, look, I entirely agree that we shouldn't have non-graduates bearing the burden for the cost of university. That's why I think we need to close tax loopholes. I think we need to reverse planned reductions to capital gains and corporation tax and have those corporations which benefit from an educated workforce putting in some money to making sure that happens. So one of the things that we've found since the introduction of 9K fees is a 0.5% year-on-year increase in the dropout rate. So you've got 6% of students who don't make it from first year to second year. As for one of my sins, I'm also moonlight as a lecturer. And in that context, where you've got students who are really struggling to pay the everyday cost of their living, they're anxious because of mounting debt, and also they're being taught by people, I'm really sorry that you had such a poor experience of teaching, but they're being taught by people like myself who in some cases don't even have a pension or are having their pensions raided by management. You can't provide a good standard of education in those settings. So what we need to do is also restructure universities internally. It's not right that some lecturers end up making roughly minimum wage while vice-chancellors' pay blossoms to, in some cases, over £300,000 per year. That's ridiculous.
Okay. The man up there at the very back. We've got a lot of men with hands up, and not many women with their hands up. I don't know why.
I was going to say, when it comes to
yes, sir.
University degrees, I think there should be a lot more joined-up thinking between what universities offer and what business and industry want in terms of, as well as professional degrees, because I can only speak for science. I think it's a shame when I see science graduates and their first job is in a coffee shop. It's a shame. And I think that universities, with the tuition fees, they've turned themselves into businesses. They're interested in getting money in. And when a science graduate comes out, job done. Universities are wealthy, but there hasn't been enough joined-up thinking between the degrees and what the country needs.
Brandon Lewis.
I agree with a number of the points that have been made, actually, particularly around, and come back to the core point, around the university fees. I'm actually having the experience at the moment of having a son who's looking at what he might be doing at university, and the point I've been making to him and some of his friends is I think it is important that students who are looking at university should act as consumers and look at what they are getting in terms of where they're going to go, what they're going to study. Actually coming very much to the gentleman's point around exactly what you want to do after your degree and what university is going to work for you in terms of the career you want to have to make sure you get good value for money. I think for the scheme overall, we have got a scheme that does mean that our universities are well funded, they are providing excellent education, we're the envy of the world. Even today we've seen again international students growing. That's a good thing, and again highlights, along with more and more students from this country from all backgrounds, including deprived backgrounds, more and more going to university. But I also think there is a really important point that Jürgen and a few people have made this evening, which is exactly what is outlined in the review that the Prime Minister outlined this week. It's not just looking at the university fees and whether that's right. I think we've got a system that's worked. It's right that we look at now what happens in the next 5 and 10 years and learn from the last few years, but also looking beyond university, exactly that point around apprenticeships and people going into vocational skills, whether it's in a business like the one we're in or Siemens or anywhere else. Actually, there's some phenomenal opportunities and some hugely successful people who didn't go to university, and actually giving people that opportunity through T-levels as they're coming forward and other things to look at what is right for them to have the best career and the most fulfilling life when they go forward.
And is it your plan to keep university fees at $9,250 as they are at the moment, or would you like to see them cut, should I say, before the next election?
Well, we've got this review that's... I'm not going to prejudge the review. We've got the independent experts who are going to sit on that review, which will report back later this year, that's looking both at universities, including the fees and the rates and everything else, but also at T-levels and vocational skills, because I think we do need to do better as a country at making people aware of what the opportunities are for vocational work as well.
Let's go on, because time is against us. Peter Wilmot, let's have your question, please. Mr. Wilmot. Sorry, I'll come to you later on when you have your hand up again. Peter Wilmot.
Is the proposed transition period just a cynical attempt to stop Brexit?
Brexit rears its head. The two-year transition you're talking about, Peter, yes?
Yes.
Is it a cynical attempt to stop Brexit? I won't come to you, Brandon, because you were just talking a moment ago. Jürgen, you start on this one.
Well, I think whichever side of the argument you're on, or we're on, one thing that I think we're agreeing on more and more is the fact that getting the right deal for Brexit is turning out to be hugely more complex than I think we had all anticipated. And look, I'm not arguing here for, we've made the wrong decision. I was clear the day the country voted to leave the EU, we are leaving the EU. What we are now talking about is how do we leave the EU? And that is a massive, massive, complex issue and a very, very difficult negotiation. And to me, it seems that there is one key argument, and that is you've got at one side of the extreme, we basically have a very sort of EU light, and we stay very close to as it is today. That, by the way, I don't hide at all, is the position that I would prefer to take as a businessman in the UK. But I've accepted that that is probably not what the British people voted for. The British people voted for something which gives us a little bit more sovereignty, which means that we can take back a little bit more control, and it means that we restrict free movement of people. I've accepted that.
Do you have any idea where it's going?
Well, having said that, what I don't accept is that there is utopia at the other end of the extreme, which is that we can crash out, we can go on WTO rules, and we can trade with the rest of the world. I just don't accept that situation, because I think whilst that will give you more sovereignty, we would be trading economic upside. Okay. We would be worse off. So I think, to come back to your question there, is we need middle ground. We need middle ground, a sensible Brexit, which is good for business, keeps economy, but gives us some more sovereignty.
But that, Peter, is exactly what you're objecting to, I think, isn't it, Peter?
I hear what you say, and I entirely accept that we need a good deal. But I also believe that the EU needs a good deal too, and they don't seem to be. They don't seem to be offering anything. Oh, the ball's in our court, and I don't see why.
Well, look, but my point is, if I may just come back, is that the better way to get a deal is to go for something that is middle ground. The way to not get a deal is to say we're going to crash out. It's going to be, because, at the end of the day, we do need to stay friendly with our neighbours. And the best way to do that is to have a sensible negotiated position.
OK, I'll come back to you. Let me just go around the table for a bit. Camilla.
I think it's a mischaracterisation to call it a transition period. It's meant to be an implementation period. It's meant to be the period in which we implement practically Brexit. And that means setting up new channels at Heathrow and all the other different practical implications. I think if the EU is trying to keep us in Brexit in name only, so-called Brino, then that's wrong. That's not what the Leavers voted for. Equally, I think if the EU is trying to prohibit us from forging new trade deals with other countries during that period, then again, that's not what we voted for. Of course, it's in the EU, and when I talk about the EU, I mean the political Brussels zealots who absolutely don't want to give us a deal that could make us thrive more than them and be more competitive. That's one thing. But I think if you go around Europe and actually speak to European people, and particularly businesses, they agree with the British. They want a free trade deal. Why wouldn't they?
John Prescott.
I fought in the 1975 election to keep out of the EU, or the common market as it was then, because I thought it was going to be the United States of Europe, a kind of state which I didn't believe in. I lost. In this one, I fought to remain and to stay in, and I lost. And that is one of the difficulties. And this week, we've seen that red bus weeks ago going around saying £350 million would come each day to the NHS. Another, I think it was the same bus by different people, was going around saying it's going to cost us £1 billion. The reality is it is difficult to know the full consequences. It's complicated, but the issues are clear. Get out or stay in. Now, they're clear positions. The trouble is the government doesn't know what it wants to do. It's disunited. It can't give a united position.
Does Labour know what it wants to do?
Well, we say clear... Have you got a problem?
No, I'm saying Labour doesn't know what it wants to do.
Are you saying that, or should I explain it?
OK, please try.
But you come to an opinion before you hear me.
Well, I think most people's
That's
opinion is
Sunday
that Labour...
Express. Look.
Labour's a bit sketchy.
Look.
Labour's position's a bit sketchy.
Let me answer it. Obviously, don't understand it. What we did say, and I didn't like the idea, that basically we recognised the public opinion to come out. And then we got a lot of trouble for supporting the government when it came to that Section 50, and we said that's what the people have spoken. We don't want to be defying the people. Though we have a clear opinion that whatever you negotiate, we have certain red lines. One of them is we want to still be trading with the European community, that we want, therefore, the tariff business to be controlled. That's desperate for our industry. And some conditions about the free movement. But we cannot give you the full position until the government negotiate what the final deal is. Then we reserve the right to say, and we forced it in Parliament. Parliament will make a decision. That's what we've agreed, but they've got to make up their mind what they're asking for. And when I hear people saying to me, well, the government's is not in the unity, of course that's true. But if they don't know, if you're a negotiator and you're leaving and you don't know what you want to leave for, don't be surprised if Europe looks aghast at us that we're all over the shop and we don't know what we want.
All right. And according to press reports...
Which paper?
Well, I think leaked by Jeremy Corbyn's staff. On Monday, Labour is going to come out in favour of remaining in the customs union. Had you heard that?
I've read it a few times.
Do you believe it?
Must have done. I believe that there is a role for the customs union. Yes, that is one of the options if they want. That's what they're discussing at Chequers today. They say they don't want customs union. If we say you're not going to have an agreement with them, then you'll have total failure. What would be the worst of all things would be to have total failure. Pull out. We're not prepared to do that. And if the customs unions is one of the areas you can find agreement and it meets our conditions that we want, yes, I'm sure we'll consider it. Don't read everything you read in the press.
Brandon Lewis, then I'll come to you up there. Brandon Lewis.
Well, I found John's contribution fascinating because I do think there is some confusion, not least of all because just today John McDonnell himself has opened the door to a second referendum, something Diane Abbott's argued for as well. So I think we do need to be clear. Labour really do not have a set position. But to come back to the question that Peter
what about staying in the customs union?
I was going to come back to the very question that Peter asked initially about this. I think the short answer is no, as Camilla rightly outlined. That implementation period is not just to allow businesses to prepare for what that final end state will be. There is work to do, as someone who's been the immigration minister until just a few weeks ago, to make sure we've got the systems in place, not least of all, to process not just the European citizens, almost 3.5 million who are now going to have settled status here, but there's 1 million Brits abroad. All of that kind of work has to be done and be done in a way that's good for people and business as well, so it's smooth and it works. And I think that's what that's about. But we have been very clear from the very beginning. The Prime Minister has been absolutely crystal clear on this. We are leaving the European Union. We are going to leave the customs union. We will leave the single market. And today, some of my colleagues from the subcommittee of the Cabinet have been meeting, as John said, at Chequers, going through talking about various sectors, agriculture, automotives, the digital economy, and the Prime Minister going through our future economic relationship. And I can say to you that the outcome of those discussions will come to Cabinet in the next few days, and late next week the Prime Minister will make a statement, make a speech and outline what that position is.
Which everybody agrees in the Cabinet?
Absolutely, yes.
So no more letter writing?
I'll wait to see that one.
The woman there in the third row from the back. Yes, you.
I think the transition period is good, and the reason is from now till the 29th of March 2019 there's 280 working days. And when you start to look at the number of policies and procedures which the government have to run through to make Brexit a success, whether it's the aircraft that fly in our sky, which is governed by EASA, whether it's the trade of animals that move through our ports at Calais. You know, you look at an example this week of a fast food supplier who changed its distributor and look at the problems that's caused. These are fantastically complicated things we've got to solve, and I think we need that period of time to complete it successfully.
What, you mean KFC is a sort of object lesson for the British economy?
I mean,
hold on a second. Yes, the person there. Yes, you.
Yeah, there's this preoccupation that time's running out for us. But, you know, is there concern that the time's running out for French farmers, for German car manufacturers, for Spanish tourist resorts, and last of all, is time running out for the Italian politicians, who've got a debt that makes ours look like Toy Town, and also they've got elections coming up, and youth unemployment of 60%.
OK, well, you're talking about every time running out. Do you think time's running out for this government, or are you happy with the way things are going?
Happy with the way that things are going.
God blimey. Ash.
I mean, I really appreciate an apocalyptic tone. It feels very dramatic. I would say that a lot of this bellicose tone of they need us more than we need them, I'm afraid sounds quite deluded. We're in a context where crashing out on WTO terms would mean a 13% dip in growth for this region that we're in right now. Just recently, we had farmers appeal to Michael Gove because there is an agricultural staffing crisis. Now, I'm not going to say that remaining in the EU would solve all those problems. I don't think it would. I think that it means that we need much more robust discussions on what kind of Brexit we want. I think preserving the customs union is essential to protecting the perishable goods trade. I think we need guarantees from this Tory government that it will protect British steel, right? British steel is very vulnerable. We need commitments that it's not just going to be a banker's Brexit, which rips up workers' rights for the many and preserves the privilege and the power of the few. Those are my priorities as a voter, and I'd like to see some concrete commitment to those things.
But surely, as
I see an arm in the air, blue and red, black and red. Yes, you. Yes, you, madam.
What I'd like to say is that the point everybody's missing is that the EU don't want to give us a good deal because everybody else will want to leave. And that is, the Italians want to leave, I know the Dutch want to leave, there's quite a few different countries want to leave. So Mr Juncker, all he wants to do is be awkward, and it was obvious with David Cameron what he hit before we had Theresa May, and she started off by saying, we have no deals better than a bad deal. Now, I think they're playing games a bit. They're the ones that are prolonging it, and it's not really getting anywhere. And the idea is we voted to leave, and we voted to leave because we don't want the immigration going as it is. We want all these things addressing, but the problem is I don't think they want to give us a deal.
Okay.
They are the ones that are dragging the feet more than we are.
Yeah.
I would like to challenge that. You know, I mean, you know,
Which bit do you want to challenge?
The challenge about they don't want to give us a deal.
But she also says everybody else wants to leave anyway.
Well, which is also not true. I mean, you know, I don't think you did say that, did you? Did you say
that?
that?
No, I said that there's a few countries that would like to leave, and they're using this as an example to put them off.
Yeah, well...
You actually talk to people in those countries. When they actually joined the EU, it went up by an awful amount. They actually used it to increase prices, and I know that because I've been to some of those countries and witnessed it.
Well,
and I've got family that live in those countries as well.
Well, look, I've spent a lot of time living and working in those countries, and you know, and I speak to them every day.
Opinion,
and look,
isn't it?
and I really don't speak to anybody who is out to punish the UK, because as the other gentleman
said... So you think they're
said,
being very cooperative then?
well, look, look, at the end of the day,
they're not, though, are they?
Look, they didn't want...
They want to know what we want.
They didn't want us to leave, you know. They are basically saying, look, we're terribly sorry, but actually, it is in our interest that we remain friends at the end of this, and definitely it's in our interest that we remain...
Yeah, but it's not about remaining friends, it's about them giving us a deal.
It absolutely is, and we need to remain trading. And that is really my point. And I also want to say to the other gentleman's point, I think what this whole argument is proving, that the whole thing is so complicated, we haven't yet worked out what the actual best way to leave is, so the transition deal is absolutely essential. to just buy us that time, to calm down a little bit, look at the facts in terms of what is best for us, what is for the other side, and my gut feeling is in the end we will come down and we will find a sensible agreement that keeps us trading. I wouldn't rule out the customs union. I don't think it's the customs union. I think it's a slightly different version of a customs union, but something that allows businesses like JCB, like Siemens, but more importantly the smaller companies to be able to trade without tariffs and without lots of
All right, ma'am. A last point from you, sir. Briefly, if you would.
Is it time that we stop calling it Brexit? The reason I say that is because if you take a constant and splice it together with a variable, you end up with a variable, and that's what Brexit is. The constant is independence, which is what we voted for, and the variable is the deal. Independence, you can't have a hard or soft independence. And we don't want some of our sovereignty back.
All right.
We want all of our sovereignty back.
Let's move on. Libby Asprey, can we have your question, please?
For how much longer will the world watch the war in Syria and allow so many people to die?
Ash Sarkar.
I think what we've seen in Syria is an unprecedented level of bloodshed and displacement. And I think the first thing that we can do as countries which are privileged to not be plunged into that kind of conflict is to accept more of those people who are displaced by conflict. I think we need to take a really good, long, hard look at how we treat refugees in this country. Just yesterday, 120 people at Yarlswood Immigration Detention Centre have gone on hunger strike for things as basic as healthcare, to have their cases heard by a judge, and to have sexual violence classified as torture. And I know that you were immigration minister for a long time, and I would like to ask you what your views are on the acceptance and treatment of refugees in this country.
We may come to that, but can we come to the war in Syria, which is what the question was about? I know you want to say that, or may want to say that, but what about the war in Syria? What do you think can be done, or should be done?
So I think the first commitment is to absorbing more refugees. I think the second commitment would have to be looking very carefully at Britain's arms dealing policies. I think that Britain's arms dealing policies has led to, as much as its own military interventions, has led to destabilisation of the Middle East as a region. I think that those are two very concrete aims that we can pursue.
I'll come to your point later. Camilla Tominey, do you think there's more or anything that this country can do, or others can do in Syria now?
Well, I suppose we've got history of brokering peace. Is it our place to go and do that in the Middle East? I don't think anyone can look at any of the images that come out of Syria these days and not feel desperately sorry for what is a gargantuan human tragedy. And again, we always say after these horrific incidents, never again, never again. But equally, I think there's a sense as well that in terms of foreign policy, intervention hasn't been successful either. And bringing people together on both sides of the table doesn't seem to work. Obviously, there's been great gains against Daesh, and that should not be underestimated. But if you actually listen to the people on the ground, I mean, the absolute abject horror of what people are going through there, I think, to be perfectly honest, as we sit here cosily in question time, is beyond the comprehension of most people. I disagree. I think Britain, by the way, is a very compassionate country. I think we've been very welcoming to asylum seekers.
Our government isn't.
Well, I think the general public, generally, when there are these awful humanitarian crises, we dig deep, we try and donate, we empathise. No one in their right mind would turn around to children coming from Syria who are seeking asylum in this country and in this audience want to reject them. So actually, let's not be too down on Britain. I think Britain's been very open-handed.
I agree Britain is a tolerant country, but our government policy does not match the public mood.
Just make the point again, because people are applauding her point. Just make the point, and then I'll put it to Brandon Lewis.
So I agree with you. I don't think that the British public looks at the plight of child refugees and wants to turn away. So why does our government insist that it's okay to continue to detain pregnant women, to split up families through deportation? This is my point, is that government policy does not match the public mood, which I think is one of compassion.
Brandon Lewis.
Well, I think it's just important to be very clear about the facts, because Ash has just said something that is completely wrong. We do not have refugees in detention centres. That is not how it works. The people in detention centres are people who are illegally in this country and are there for a period of time until they are going back to their home country.
That's factually untrue. Many of them still have their cases under review.
Just let me finish. Refugees go through an entirely different system. We as a country are doing one of the biggest programmes we've ever done. 23,000 refugees coming to this country. We're slightly ahead of the schedule that David Cameron set out. I've been very fortunate in the period that I was Immigration Minister to meet a number of families who have come from Syria, to listen to them about what they've come from, the experience they've had, the welcome they've had from local authorities, charities, community groups when they've come to this country. We should be very, very proud as a country, not just of the billions of pounds we are spending in the region to do our bit in the international community, one of the biggest in the world and the biggest aid programme we have taken forward, I think the second largest support in the world. But obviously, as Camilla rightly said as well, again, I think the welcome that we give people in this country, and there are 23,000 Syrian refugees, as I say, coming to this country, on top of refugees from elsewhere. We have a very, very strong programme for refugees, and what Ash has just outlined is a completely false statement about how the refugee programme works.
That's not true. Asylum seekers in Yarls would still have
Asylum
their cases
seekers are not
under
refugees.
review. So they're people who have escaped conflict. They're people who escaped conflict, escaped torture, escaped sexual violence, and we continue to lock them up.
No,
Do you think that's a just policy?
No, well, actually,
do you think it's a just policy that 70% of detainees at Yarlswood who are female have experienced sexual violence? Do you think that's just?
Actually, Ash, what you've just said is again wrong.
No, that is that's a fact. That's from Women for Refugee Women.
Detention centres are for people who are being removed from the country or going back to their home country, who are in this country illegally. Asylum seekers
who
go
still
through
have their cases under review.
No,
That's
asylum
just a fact.
seekers go through a different process. People who are illegally are different to asylum seekers, which is different again from refugees. There are different processes, and you do a disservice to people and hard-working people across this country working in those facilities, helping refugees, and the refugees and asylum seekers themselves when you confuse the two things.
All right, hold on, Ash. The person there, you made the point. Yes.
We talk about a skills crisis in this country, but when will the government and companies do more to recruit people who are refugees in this country, who are engineers and skilled people?
But actually, I think you make a very, very good point with that. And there is a huge amount of work that goes on when refugees come here, making sure that they can learn English, get into trade in this country. And again, as I say, I've met a lot of refugees who have been through that, play a hugely important part in their communities and in the economy of this country. That's why I say we should be very proud as a country of what we do for refugees, and we should continue to do it.
All right, Libby, what do you think should be done? You asked the question.
Well, my question wasn't really coming from the point of refugees as such. It's the people who can't get out of the country. And I'm sure the refugees would rather like to stay in Syria than come over here because that's their home. And I just don't see how we've seen so many attacks like just recently on Eastern Ghouta go on, where there's hospitals who don't have anything, and the UN are just there saying we need to end the war. It needs to be ended, but no one's really doing much about it, in my opinion. And I was just wondering why that is still the case.
John Prescott?
Well, I'm deeply saddened to listen to the fact that we all admit nothing more can be done. There are problems about refugees, etc. But when I turn on that television seeing all those kids dying, it's being done deliberately as part of a war policy. That makes him, Assam, as man that has to be dealt with when it comes. Doesn't help for negotiations, of course. Please negotiate with him. We'll come to a deal. Stop this. He's not going to say, if I do that, will you take me to the International Court? These are the difficulties. My concern goes before that. It takes me back to Iraq, arguing with Tony Blair about whether we should have regime dismissal, because that's what's about here. If you look what NATO and Western countries have been doing, particularly in the Middle East, we've made war between religions. We've intervened to say our values are superior, so we're going to remove you from the actual administration and control. There's a fundamental issue here. The UN can't do anything. They talk of veto would stop it, whether it's American or indeed Trump. Trump, basically, and Putin, they are global powers who are now doing many things that prevent to deal with the Syrian problem. The Russians are actively involved. The Americans are prepared to bomb. We're actually sending in bombs, basically, by this new automatic business. I can't remember the name of the damn weapons.
Drones.
And they use the drones. Somebody in Kent is actually doing it now, as if they're playing a game. We've got to get out of that situation, and we've got to recognise it's not a popular view. You can read about the Crusades. We're doing the same thing now, and we're paying a very heavy price for it. Not us in the studios today, but the kids that you see each night face the consequences of us making terrible decisions. We think democracy and values is far superior and quite prepared to intervene military for it. We better start thinking much more deeper about what the results are. And that's the actions of which Western powers, to my mind, and NATO have been actively involved in the name of democracy. Tell the kids that.
Jürgen Meyer.
Well, there are two discussions going on here, and one is, do we and can we do more with regard to refugees coming here? And, and I certainly think we can and we should, and I also very much agree with your point. Obviously the key reason for doing that is humanitarian, but there is an issue where actually these people are coming with very good educations. I've met people from Syria which come with great engineering degrees and can do great jobs in companies like ours. So there is that. But I think ultimately the only way the problem will be solved is to resolve it at source, which is, I think, really what your question was. What more can we do to resolve the conflict? And I do think we're in a pretty horrible place where, the key sort of superpowers to which we do belong, we're all a little bit too inwardly focused on our own domestic issues, America first principle in America. And ultimately, we can't do this on our own. We've tried that once before, it didn't work. It takes a catalyst, and maybe that's what we should be, to bring some of these parties together with the UN, who do seem to be powerless, but I think, the nations need to come together and ultimately sort out what we can do to sort this horrible, horrible situation going on in Syria and stop it at source.
Should we actually be looking at creating a new global organisation? Because the United Nations, the Security Council, all the other things you've been talking about have failed us decade after decade and really have a different approach globally.
Do you see the United Nations as a failure? Very briefly, we're coming to the end, but it's a good point.
No, I don't, and I think we get very caught up in creating new structures when actually what we do need to do is look at the outcomes. I think there is a good point Jürgen makes around making sure that we are working together properly with the UN to get a solution, but one that is led by ultimately is able to have a situation where the Syrian people are able to govern themselves again. We're a long way from that at the moment, looking at the horrendous scenes we've seen over the weekend. But I think we have got to keep working away.
But there was a time when we thought the
together.
UN could help solve some of these ghastly, murderous problems, and now that point, the lady says, seems to have passed. We can no longer rely on it.
I still think...
7 years we've been seeing these scenes in Syria. 7 years, not a few days, and we have not achieved anything as far as I can see.
Look, I appreciate it. It is horrendous what we are seeing happening there, but I do think ultimately we have got a regime in Syria that is treating its own people in a way that we struggle to comprehend as individuals in the Western world and to look at what they're doing. But I do think the UN is the right body to try and bring people together to get a resolution that ultimately can get to a better place.
I'm sorry, we have to stop.
A global solution showed that the world could get together to deal with the climate change problems. All races all got together to find that agreement. So there is a possibility, but you've got to work at it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. We have to end there. Our time's up. Next Thursday, Question Time is coming from Blackpool, and on the panel we have Nigel Farage, Diane Abbott and Ken Clarke. Ooh. And the week after that we're going to be in Westminster. We have Liam Fox, the Trade Secretary, and the Bake-Off judge, Prue Leith, on the panel there. Now, those are two editions of Question Time, one in Blackpool, one in Westminster. To go to either, on the screen there is the address, our website, or the number to call 0330 123 9988. And now, as you know, the debate we've been having here carries on Radio 5 Live, the BBC, with Adrian Chiles and Chris Mason. They're waiting for your call. If you want to get involved in that, the text number is on the screen now, and you can also follow their discussions on iPlayer. Here, my thanks to the panel, to all of you who came to Utoxeter. Until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.
Jane Moore is rounding up the headlines, whilst George Galloway has an opinion on Labour's foreign policy. This week, in just a moment.